European farmers were blocking roads with tractors and burning stacks of hay on the streets of Brussels. A secret message was being sent quickly across the Atlantic Ocean, from Washington to Brussels. The United States just sent a clear warning to Ursula von der Leyen, and what the message says could end not just her job as a leader, but the whole system that keeps Europe united. This isn't just about farming anymore. This is about power, lies, and a problem so serious that even the farmers don't know the whole story yet. The question isn't whether von der Leyen made a mistake. The question is whether she was really working for Europe at all, or for someone else completely different. The warning arrived on February 3rd, 2026. It wasn't sent through the normal way leaders talk to each other. It didn't come from the State Department's European office or through the US ambassador to the EU. It came straight from the office of the United States Trade Representative, skipped every normal rule, and landed on von der Leyen's desk with just one message attached: stop. Now, what was in that warning has not been told to the public. But people inside the European Commission, who agreed to talk only if their names stayed secret, have confirmed one thing. The United States is no longer asking nicely. They are demanding. And what they're demanding about is the EU-Mercosur trade deal that von der Leyen has been secretly trying to push through, even though farmers' protests have stopped half of Europe from working normally. To understand why Washington just got really angry at its oldest friend, and you need to understand what the farmer problem really showed. This wasn't just about dishonest officials stealing money meant to help farmers. This was about people completely losing trust in the European government and the people who claim to represent them. And right in the middle of it all is a woman who promised to make Europe a powerful force in the world, but may have sold it out to whoever paid the most money instead. The ghost farm problem became public in January 2026 when the European Public Prosecutor's Office published results that shocked even the people in Brussels who thought they'd seen everything. Over 700 million euros in emergency farm aid had disappeared into thin air. The money was supposed to save family farms that were being crushed by high energy costs and impossible environmental rules. Instead, it went to criminal groups running fake farms across Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania. These weren't small criminals. These were organized crime groups with connections to local government officials, land offices, and even members of national parliaments. The investigation showed that thousands of hectares of farmland that didn't exist had been registered in the EU money database. Payments were processed automatically. No one checked. No one made sure things were real. And when real farmers started going bankrupt and begging for help, they were told the money had run out. Ursula von der Leyen's response to this disaster was not to start an immediate investigation into her own commission's failure to watch over things properly. It was to freeze all payments to the affected areas while they checked things. In other words, she punished the victims. Real farmers who had nothing to do with the fake farms were suddenly cut off from payments they were owed, payments they had already counted on to buy seeds for spring planting. The anger that followed was not just about money. It was about being betrayed. These were the same farmers who had been forced to follow von der Leyen's Green Deal rules. They had used less fertilizer, cut their pollution, and watched their costs go way up while they grew less food. They had done everything Brussels asked, and in return, they got nothing. Worse than nothing, they got blamed for being part of the problem. That's when the tractors started rolling toward Brussels, thousands of them from France, Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, and Belgium itself. They came together in the European quarter, blocking access to the Commission buildings, the Council headquarters, and the European Parliament. They burned hay bales, they dumped animal waste at the gates, and they made one demand: cancel the Mercosur deal. Because while von der Leyen was freezing payments to European farmers and lecturing them about protecting the environment, she was secretly finishing a trade agreement that would flood European markets with South American farm products made using methods that are completely illegal inside the EU. The EU-Mercosur Trade Pact is von der Leyen's biggest foreign policy achievement, or at least that's how she wants history to remember it. The deal would create one of the largest free trade zones in the world, connecting the European Union with Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. It would remove taxes on billions of euros worth of goods. It would open new markets for European cars, machinery, and medicines. And it would allow the import of 99,000 tons of beef and 180,000 tons of chicken from South America every single year. The problem is that this meat is produced using growth hormones, antibiotics, and pesticides that have been banned in Europe for decades. The very same farmers who were told they couldn't use certain fertilizers because of environmental concerns are now being asked to compete with imports that don't follow any of those rules. The double standard is huge, and it gets worse. Because the Mercosur deal doesn't just make it harder for European farmers to compete on price, it destroys them on principle. Von der Leyen has spent years promoting the European Green Deal as the model for sustainable farming. She has put in place carbon taxes, pollution limits, and nature protection requirements that have made European farming one of the most expensive and regulated in the world. And now she wants to reward countries that cut down the Amazon rainforest to make room for cattle ranches. The farmers saw it immediately. This wasn't about free trade. This was about replacing European farming with cheaper alternatives while pretending to be environmental leaders. It was a betrayal wrapped in a press release. But the farmers didn't know half of it, because while they were fighting for their farms in the streets, another battle was happening behind closed doors, a battle between Brussels and Washington. And this one had nothing to do with supporting family farms. This was about who controls world trade and who gets to set the rules. The United States has been watching the Mercosur negotiations with growing worry, not because they care about European farmers, but because the deal threatens American farm exports to Europe. For years, the EU has used plant health standards, food safety rules, and environmental certifications as tools to block or limit American beef, chicken, and grain from European markets. Washington has repeatedly challenged these barriers as protectionism, disguised as public health policy. And now, just as the US was preparing to launch a major trade attack to force the EU to open its farm markets, von der Leyen is giving South American competitors a free pass. The warning from the US trade representative was blunt. If the EU is willing to accept South American farm products that don't meet its own stated standards, then it has no legal or moral reason to block American products. Either the standards are real and apply to everyone, or they are fake and need to be dropped completely. The message was clear. Von der Leyen had just handed the United States the legal ammunition to blow apart the entire EU system of rules on food imports. And if she didn't back down, Washington was prepared to fight back with taxes that would cripple the European car industry. This is where the problem stops being about farmers and becomes about something much bigger. Because the question everyone in Brussels is now asking is this: did Ursula von der Leyen know this was coming? Did she understand that pushing through Mercosur would start a trade war with the United States? Or was she so focused on securing her legacy as a world leader that she ignored the warnings from her own trade advisors? And if she did know, then why did she do it anyway? What was she promised in return, and by whom? Because the timeline of events suggests that von der Leyen may have made a secret deal that she never told the European public about. A deal that sacrifices European farmers, European food independence, and possibly even European independence in exchange for something else entirely. The tractors are still in the streets, the fires are still burning. But now the real question is no longer whether von der Leyen can survive the farmers' rebellion. The real question is whether she was ever working for Europe at all. The timeline tells a story that Ursula von der Leyen does not want investigated. In November 2025, just weeks before the ghost farm problem would explode into public view, von der Leyen made a quiet trip to Buenos Aires. The official reason was a climate summit. The real reason was finalizing the Mercosur deal in secret. She met with the presidents of Brazil and Argentina behind closed doors. No cameras, no press conference. Just a brief statement about strengthening transatlantic partnerships. But leaked documents from that meeting obtained by investigative journalists in Germany reveal something far more disturbing. Von der Leyen allegedly agreed to fast-track the Mercosur approval process without full consultation with member states. She promised that the European Commission would use its executive authority to push the deal through before opposition could organize. And she did this knowing full well that European farmers were on the edge of financial collapse. Why would she take that risk? The answer may lie in what happened immediately after that Buenos Aires meeting. Within days, major European corporations with significant investments in South America began quietly pressuring EU member states to support the deal. Car makers like Volkswagen and Stellantis, who have massive production facilities in Brazil and Argentina, suddenly became vocal supporters of Mercosur. Chemical giants like BASF and Bayer, who export billions in farm products to South America, started funding pro-trade think tanks across Europe. And financial institutions with exposure to South American debt markets began publishing reports about the economic benefits of deepening EU-Mercosur ties. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidental. It looked like a planned campaign. And at the center of it was von der Leyen promising corporate interests that she could deliver the deal despite the political cost. This is where the United States enters the picture, not as a defender of farmers, but as a rival superpower protecting its own economic interests. Because the Mercosur deal wasn't just about trade between Europe and South America. It was about locking the United States out of key markets and creating a new axis of economic power that excluded Washington entirely. The Biden administration had spent years trying to rebuild economic ties with Latin America after the Trump era. They had proposed infrastructure investments, green energy partnerships, and trade frameworks designed to counter Chinese influence in the region. And now, just as that strategy was beginning to gain traction, the European Union was swooping in with a deal that would give European corporations special access to the very markets the US was trying to secure. The warning from Washington was not just about farm standards, it was a shot across the bow of European world power ambitions. The message was simple. If Europe wants to play the great power game, it needs to understand that the United States will not sit quietly while Brussels carves out areas of influence that hurt American interests. And if von der Leyen thought she could finalize Mercosur without consequence, she was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Because the United States has leverage that Europe cannot ignore. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the semiconductor supply chain, was the financial system that underpins the euro, and most importantly, the American market itself, which remains the largest single destination for European exports. The warning delivered to von der Leyen reportedly included a list of potential ways to fight back. Taxes on European cars that could add thousands of euros to the cost of every car sold in America. Restrictions on European access to advanced semiconductor technology, which would crush the EU's ambitions to build a competitive chip industry, and most devastatingly, a review of US support for European energy security, particularly the liquefied natural gas exports that have kept Europe's lights on since the Russian gas cutoff. These were not empty threats. These were carefully chosen pressure points designed to make it clear that if von der Leyen chose Mercosur over the transatlantic relationship, she would be choosing economic isolation. But here's where the story gets even darker. Because von der Leyen's response to the U.S. warning was not to back down, it was to double down. In a speech to the European Parliament just days after receiving the warning, she defended the Mercosur deal as essential to European strategic autonomy. She argued that Europe could no longer rely on any single partner, including the United States, for its economic security. She called the deal a milestone in Europe's emergence as a truly independent world power. The applause from the chamber was polite but thin because everyone in that room understood what she had just done. She had called the American bluff, or at least she thought she had. The farmers understood it differently. To them, von der Leyen's speech was confirmation of their worst fears. She was willing to sacrifice their livelihoods, their communities, and their way of life in pursuit of an abstract vision of European power that had nothing to do with the people she was supposed to serve. The protests got stronger, the tractors multiplied, and the violence began to grow worse. In France, tras un tralon avayigi de years, protesters clashed with riot police outside a regional government building. In Poland, farmers blocked the German border, cutting off one of Europe's most important trade routes. In the Netherlands, activists stormed a commission office and dumped thousands of liters of milk on the floor. The symbolism was clear. This is what you're throwing away. This is what you're destroying. And we will not let you do it quietly. Von der Leyen's political allies began to abandon her. Emmanuel Macron, who had initially supported Mercosur as a way to boost French medicine and aerospace exports, suddenly reversed course and demanded that the farm provisions be renegotiated. The German coalition government, already paralyzed by internal divisions, announced that it could not support approval until the concerns of German farmers were addressed. Even countries like Spain and Italy, which stood to benefit significantly from increased access to South American markets, started hedging their positions as their own farm sectors erupted in protest. Von der Leyen was losing control, and everyone could see it. But the most damaging blow came from within her own commission. In late January, a senior trade official leaked an internal memo to the press. The memo, dated from early December 2025, showed that Commission economists had warned von der Leyen that the Mercosur deal would likely result in the loss of up to 30,000 European farm jobs within the first 5 years. They had calculated that certain sectors, particularly beef and chicken, would see price drops of 15 to 20% as South American imports flooded the market, and they had explicitly advised her to delay approval until ways to help affected farmers could be put in place. Von der Leyen had ignored the memo. She had pressed forward anyway. And now, with that memo public, she could no longer claim she didn't know. She had known exactly what the deal would do, and she had chosen to do it anyway. The political firestorm was immediate. Opposition parties in the European Parliament demanded her resignation. Farmer unions called for a no-confidence vote, and media across Europe began asking the question that von der Leyen could not answer. Who were you really working for? Because the evidence was mounting that this was never about European strategic autonomy. This was about corporate profits, political legacy, and a vision of Europe that existed only in the boardrooms of multinational corporations and the think tanks they funded. The farmers were not protesting a trade deal. They were protesting the fact that their own government had sold them out to interests that saw them as expendable. And then, just when it seemed things couldn't get worse for von der Leyen, the United States made its next move. On February 4th, the U.S. Commerce Department announced that it was launching an investigation into European car subsidies under Section 301 of the Trade Act. The investigation, which could take months, would examine whether European governments were providing unfair support to their car industries in violation of international trade rules. If the investigation found violations, the United States would be legally authorized to impose compensatory taxes on European car imports. The announcement was carefully worded, but everyone understood what it really was: retaliation. The United States was making good on its warning, and the target was not farming. It was the one industry that Europe could not afford to lose: the car sector, which employs millions of people and represents hundreds of billions in annual exports. Von der Leyen had gambled that the United States would not risk a trade war over a deal with South America. She had calculated that Washington's commitment to the transatlantic alliance would outweigh its economic complaints. She had believed that she could outmaneuver the Americans through sheer political will. She had been catastrophically wrong. And now Europe was staring at the very real possibility of a simultaneous farm collapse and industrial recession, all because one woman had refused to listen to the warnings that came from every direction. The tractors are still blocking the roads. The fires are still burning in the fields. But now there's a new question hanging over Brussels, a question that no one wants to say out loud, but everyone is thinking. If Ursula von der Leyen was willing to ignore the farmers, ignore her own advisors, and ignore the warnings from the most powerful country on earth, then what else has she been ignoring? And more terrifying still, what else is she willing to sacrifice before this is over? The collapse is happening in real time. And it's not just political, it's institutional. On February 5th, just hours after the U.S. Commerce Department announced its investigation into European auto subsidies, the German government made an unprecedented move. Chancellor Olaf Scholz publicly stated that Germany would not support the approval of the Mercosur deal under its current terms. This wasn't a negotiating position. This was a complete withdrawal of support. And coming from the EU's largest economy and most powerful member state, it was a death sentence for von der Leyen's flagship trade agreement. Without Germany, there is no Mercosur. Without Mercosur, there is no legacy. And without a legacy, there is no political future for Ursula von der Leyen. But the damage goes far deeper than one failed trade deal. What we are witnessing is the unraveling of the entire premise that von der Leyen built her commission around. She promised a geopolitical Europe, a Europe that could stand as an equal to the United States and China, a Europe that could chart its own course in a multipolar world. But the farmer problem and the American warning have exposed the fatal flaw in that vision. Europe is not geopolitically independent. It is economically dependent. Dependent on American security guarantees, dependent on American technology, dependent on American markets. And when push came to shove, when von der Leyen tried to assert that independence by sidelining Washington in favor of a South American alliance, the United States simply reminded her of the reality: you do not have the power you think you have. The farmers understood this instinctively. They knew that the Mercosur deal was not about making Europe stronger. It was about making certain corporations richer while ordinary people paid the price. They knew that the ghost farm problem was not an isolated case of corruption. It was evidence of systemic failure, of institutions that no longer served the public, but instead served themselves. And they knew that when von der Leyen chose to freeze their payments while pushing through a trade deal that would destroy their livelihoods, she was making a choice about whose interests mattered, and it wasn't theirs. The warning from Washington was simply the final confirmation of what the farmers had been shouting from their tractors all along. The European project, as currently built, is not designed to protect its own people. It is designed to help global capital flows. And when those flows come into conflict with the needs of ordinary citizens, the citizens lose every single time. Von der Leyen's mistake was not that she chose corporations over farmers. Her mistake was that she believed she could do so without consequence. She thought the farmers would eventually go home. She thought the Americans would eventually back down. She thought she could outlast both rebellions through sheer political endurance. But she miscalculated the depth of the rage she had unleashed and the determination of the superpower she had challenged. Now she stands alone. Abandoned by her political allies, opposed by her own member states, threatened by the United States, and surrounded by thousands of tractors that show no sign of leaving. The Queen of Brussels has become the Queen of nothing. Her commission is paralyzed, her trade deal is dead, and her political future is measured in weeks, not years. The European Parliament is already quietly discussing who might replace her. Names are being floated. Alliances are being formed. And the consensus is building that von der Leyen has become a liability that Europe can no longer afford. But the real question is not what happens to Ursula von der Leyen. The real question is what happens to the European project itself. Because this crisis has revealed something that cannot be unseen. The gap between what Brussels promises and what Brussels delivers has become a chasm. The institutions are corrupt. The decision-making is hidden. The accountability is non-existent. And the people have lost faith. The farmers are not just protesting a trade deal. They are protesting the entire system that produced it. A system that prioritizes abstract world power ambitions over concrete human needs. A system that bails out banks but freezes payments to farmers. A system that lectures the world about sustainability while importing products from deforested rainforests. A system that claims to represent the people of Europe while systematically ignoring them. The tractors will eventually leave the streets of Brussels. The fires will eventually burn out, but the damage has been done. The facade has cracked, and behind it, everyone can now see what was always there. A project built not on democratic legitimacy, but on economic convenience, not on popular sovereignty, but on elite consensus, not on the will of the people, but on the interests of those who profit from their labor. Ursula von der Leyen will be remembered not as the architect of a geopolitical Europe, but as the leader who exposed its emptiness. She tried to build an empire, but she forgot that empires require foundations. And the foundation of Europe, the trust between governors and governed, has just collapsed beneath her feet. The warning from the United States was not really about trade, it was about power. And the message was simple. Europe is not ready to stand alone, not economically, not politically, not strategically. When anyone who tries to pretend otherwise will be reminded of that reality in the most painful way possible. Von der Leyen tried. She failed. And now the entire continent is paying the price for her ambition. The farmers knew it first. The Americans confirmed it. And soon everyone will understand it. The Queen of Brussels has fallen, and she's taking the dream of an independent Europe down with her. The only question left is who will rise from the ashes and whether they will learn the lessons that Ursula von der Leyen refused to see until it was far too late. The pressure is mounting, the clock is ticking, and the future of Europe is being decided not in the halls of power, but in the streets where the tractors still stand guard. What do you think? Can Europe survive this crisis? Or has von der Leyen's betrayal broken something that cannot be repaired? Let us know in the comments below.